Welcome to the Debate at Go8 podcast series. Europe may be on the other side of the globe, but it has many ongoing links to Australia through history, culture, politics and trade. Today we're canvassing many of these issues with the European Union's ambassador to our country, Gabriele Visentin. Prior to his arrival in Australia, Ambassador Visentin was the first EU Special Envoy for the Indo-Pacific. In recent years, the European Union has worked on improving its cooperation with the Indo-Pacific region. In 2020, it became a strategic partner of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, launching the Indo-Pacific strategy the following year and staging a successful EU-ASEAN summit in 2022. Australia and the EU share strong bonds. The European Union is Australia's third largest trading partner and second largest source of foreign investment. Diplomatic relations go back as far as 1962, with our shared values rooted in a common cultural, historical and personal heritage. There are many benefits to be shared by both the EU and Australia from a strong relationship, but there are also many challenges to be faced in the Indo-Pacific region. Hello, my name's Ron Candelars. I'm a freelance journalist and producer, and throughout this series we've been canvassing a range of topics touching upon the work of all the Group of 8 universities. They include the Australian National University, Monash University, UNSW Sydney, the Universities of Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Queensland and Western Australia. In the Canberra studio with me today is the CEO of the Group of 8 universities, Vicky Thompson. Ambassador Visentin, a warm welcome to you and congratulations on your appointment here in Australia. Let's go back a little bit in time. You were the first ever EU Special Envoy for the Indo-Pacific prior to your appointment as EU Ambassador to Australia. How did that appointment come about?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me here today. It's a real pleasure. Thanks. It came with the setting up of the EU first ever policy, comprehensive policy towards the Indo-Pacific. It's called Cooperation Strategy between the EU and the Indo-Pacific. It was presented on September 15th, 2021. And then I was appointed as the first special envoy precisely because the EU gave itself the means to undertake a 360-degree policy towards this region. If you want, I can tell you it was the formal acknowledgement of the absolute and strategic importance that the Indo-Pacific had and has and will have for the EU. I mean, the 40% of the overall import towards the EU come from the Indo-Pacific region. And this is a region where you have the 60% of the world GDP. So the fact that the Indo-Pacific should remain free and open is vital for the EU, so not only economically, it's also geopolitically super important. So the fact that the EU acknowledged the importance beyond the mere economic aspect demanded to have, let's call it, an ambassador for this policy. So that's why we came out with the setting up not just of the policy, but also of the position of a special envoy.
So that was in 2021.
Yes.
Why then? Was there a catalyst in terms of that? Because, I mean, the Indo-Pacific's always been there.
Absolutely.
The EU's been there for a long time. So was there a catalyst, or it was just a growing recognition of the importance of the region and the relationship between the two?
More of the second, actually, but it's within, let's call it, the spirit of the times. I mean, the US acknowledged before that there was a shift towards the tilt, let's say, towards the Pacific region. It took us a little bit longer, also because our direct interests were let's say, less evident than the American ones in the region. But obviously, they came more and more important, more and more evident with the time passing by. The first very important, let's say, development in the region was our free trade agreement with Japan. Actually, it's a comprehensive agreement that we have, which goes beyond trade, but that that is, for example, the biggest trade agreement in the world in terms of volumes of goods exchanged. And in the first 3 years of life of this free trade agreement, the bilateral trade between Japan and the EU grew by 30%. And telling it's big, it's a lot.
In what particular areas?
Oh, I mean, I'm giving you an average of everything. So basically the overall growth was 30% in the first 3 years of life of the agreement.
So the interest at that time, you mentioned about the economy and trade, but was also, you mentioned geopolitically, we live in interesting times. Was it also a concern about freedom of movement through the South China Seas as well?
Absolutely. As I said, the acknowledgement of the need to keep the Indo-Pacific free and open was paramount. And that was linked as well to the importance of the economic relations. But in the Indo-Pacific, we acknowledge also the presence of, how can I say, global challenges which need global responses. And I'm talking about, for example, not only the governance of the ocean, but the fight against climate change. It's one of the regions where the effects of climate change are the most dangerous and the most visible. And it goes against the mere choice of whether or not going green. For most of the Pacific Island states, the rise of the ocean level means existence of the states themselves. So the fight against the effects of the climate change is vital, and it has a direct consequence on the credibility that we as EU or you as Australia, as major economic, partner, or also major economic polluter, environmental polluters, have towards this country. Because when we mean that we want to set up new, how can I say, a development model for these countries, we have to sound credible also in terms of providing a sensible and credible fight against climate change, which would help this country to exist.
So on the issue, though, of security of movement, what impact would restriction of trade through the South China Sea have on the economies of Europe? Obviously, you're talking about it's increasing exponentially. It'd have a significant impact, obviously.
Oh, it would have an incredible high impact. I mean, we already see... I told you we have 40% of the overall import towards the EU, which comes from the Indo-Pacific. So that's already, I mean, our industries work with raw materials and with other other goods which are imported from here. And actually, a wake-up call was, for example, and that was by accident, but think if there is a clear strategy of that. When there was this big container ship from Evergreen, which turned aside in the Suez Canal, and that impeded for a couple of weeks any kind of import from the Indo-Pacific. And I can tell you the European industry suffered a lot because with the on real-time import and manufacturing and the processing, not allowing ships to come in through the Suez Canal for 2-3 weeks, that was a huge difference. And we see it also now where we have all the maritime traffic having to divert from the canal and having to do the tour of Africa. That has also... The supply chain is not, let's say, dramatically reduced, but the costs are dramatically increased. So we're going to suffer.
It does highlight the vulnerabilities, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It just takes. I mean, obviously, there's quite a crisis happening in terms of ships being rerouted that way. But you had the Panama Canal, you had the Suez Canal. And suddenly, we have this shock of production, supply. So I think in many ways, a lot of people would think the EU is so far away and these things are so distant, but you just need one thing to happen for a whole chain of events.
I think many Australians would be shocked at the level of trade from the Indo-Pacific to Europe. And in fact, the EU appears to be taking a much bigger picture approach on that because on the EU website, the emphasis on our region is clear. It says the centre of gravity of the world's economy has shifted into the Indo-Pacific region with close to 50% of the world's GDP and 60% of the world's population. Peace and stability in the region are crucial for Europe and the world. So can we expect greater support from the EU should that peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific be threatened in the future?
Definitely. It's an acknowledgement of the importance. that the Indo-Pacific has. The security and defense concerns are present. And with the war of aggression which is going on in Europe, I mean Russia against Ukraine, it becomes obvious that we don't have separate theaters. The world security and defense, let's say, framework is unique. There's only one, with different, let's say, declinations, but that's it. So the fight against the international multilateral order is present as in Europe as here. So I think that it's a duty of the Western democracies to get together and to show that illegal wars or acts against the multilateral international order have a price. And so I think that, for example, the incredible support that Australia has given to Ukraine and indirectly to the EU throughout the world, the war of aggression that Russia has undertaken against Ukraine is remarkable. Australia has been providing military equipment, has been providing financial assistance, has followed completely the EU on any kind of sanction against Russians, has even allowed, and this is something I think extremely noticeable for Australia, has even relaxed a little bit the regulation on humanitarian regulation law. I mean, you have accepted a lot of Ukrainian refugees as well, as we have done in Europe. In Europe, we have 5 million Ukrainian refugees. The EU has suspended its regulations on asylum and migration to allow to take in as much as Ukrainians as possible. So there is an alignment, and the alignment of the Western democracies is absolutely vital in order to guarantee the international rules-based order continues to be respected.
Do you think Australia's been doing enough in terms of freedom of movement of trade in the Red Sea? Because there's been criticisms about us not pulling our weight there.
Allow me not to comment. I don't know what the constraints of the government are, but from what I see, there is a total support from the Australian side to what is going on there and to the fact that the freedom of navigation must be upheld. I think that there might be some concerns in terms of logistics or availabilities of means, but definitely there is a total alignment with what the EU is doing, what the US is doing, what others are doing. And if you allow me, the EU is setting up its second ever military naval mission. We have already one Atalanta, which is deployed in the Indian Ocean, and the discussion now with the ministers is going on, and it's highly likely that there will be soon an EU military naval mission in the Red Sea.
Okay, interesting. Getting back to the Indo-Pacific area, though, can you explain to us what you see as the synergies between the EU, Indo-Pacific and Australia in the long term?
Everything. Well, I don't have to tell you, but I tell you. So Australia is the biggest economy of the Southern Hemisphere, is the biggest country of the Southern Hemisphere. It has both a Pacific and an Indian coastline. It's key to anything. Whatever has to happen in the Indo-Pacific has to pass through the support of Australia. So be it fight against climate change, be it ocean governance, be it free trade and economic cooperation, be it connectivity and development for the underdeveloped parts of the region. We just have to, let's say, join forces and see what I want to use it again, this expression, because this is what makes the whole difference, what Western democracies can do.
I want to also bring it back to, because we're here as part of the Go8, Australia and the EU have a long history of research collaboration in the higher education sector. Do you think we can grow that research collaboration in the future, particularly with Go8 universities?
Absolutely. I mean, this is both Australia and the EU are world superpowers in terms of education, research, and capacity of innovation. So strengthening our links, making them easier, making them deeper, would just make sense. So I think that we already have an incredible good cooperation. The Group of 8 is a world-renowned group of top-class, cutting-edge universities. So
the basis is there. That's right. I mean, the EU as a bloc is our largest partner in terms of research collaboration already. But I think that we could be even doing more. There is an incredibly generous scheme called Horizon Europe. It's I think it is the world's largest research fund.
It's 100 billion euros, which makes 160 billion Australian dollars.
Significant. And we do have access to that fund through research partners. But we could do so much more.
Are we dragging the chain a bit on that?
I think we are.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll let the ambassador answer.
No, please, Vicky, do the dirty job. Yes.
Well, I think we are. We've had the opportunity to become part of that in a more formal way, which would mean that we would access a greater amount of funding for Australia.
So what are the sticking
research
points?
Funding? Canada's done it. Israel's done it. New Zealand's done it. It always sticks in my craw when New Zealand has done it.
The first thing that UK wanted from the EU after having signed the Windsor Framework, namely the peace after the Brexit, was precisely to be reassociated to Horizon.
Yeah, that's the significance.
Yeah.
You have to pay to play.
Right.
And what our successive governments have failed to do, and this is all sides of politics, to actually go to the EU and say, we are actually committed and interested to have the discussion and commence the negotiation. And from where I sit, I have the privilege of being the CEO of the Group of 8, but also the Deputy Chair of the European Australian Business Council. It would have seemed to me that the discussions around the free trade agreement, whilst there was a lot of goodwill, and we can come to the FTA in a moment, but it was a great opportunity for us to actually say, well, here's the free trade agreement. While we're having those discussions and in good faith, here's the Australian government's commitment to come to the table with a no obligation at this point in time. And the Australian government failed to do that. And in fact, more than failed to do that, they said they wouldn't do that. So we're very disappointed at that. And I think that puts us behind the 8 ball in terms of, building our research partnerships with our like-minded, values-aligned partners. You'd used the word alignment a lot previously, Ambassador. I mean, that alignment is built on a very strong foundation of decades and decades and decades of partnership. And so why wouldn't we access that fund? So I guess with that preamble, I'd be very interested in your views as to what your take is on it and the missed opportunity, the dragging the chain, as Ron quite rightly says.
Yeah. Well, let's say for the time being, it's a missed opportunity. I think it's just there. It just needs to be grabbed. I consider that as a low-hanging fruit rather than a missed opportunity. Let's put it this way.
And that's why you're the diplomat and I'm not.
No, all you said is right. Maybe a precision. Any kind of Australian financing, I mean, of course, there are costs involved, would not go to the EU, would go to the Australian entities which participate. So it would not be, how can I say, a contribution to the EU budget. Not at all. The contribution of Australia to the functioning of Horizon will be limited to the financing of the participation of the Australian entities. So there wouldn't be any kind of money that would go from Australia to the EU. It would just...
Yeah, and that's an important distinction to make.
That's an important distinction to make.
And what sort of research projects could you see as part of all of this?
Well, that's part of the negotiation, but normally everything, because the association, and let me go a bit technical, the association to the Horizon Europe is not open to everybody. It's open only to countries which have a high potential in terms of research and development, but also which are democracies and aligned in terms of values, i.e., which do not politicize research. So we don't open to anybody. We open only to the ones who share our view towards research and which have a clear added value in being associated with us. So we don't open to anybody. It's just a very important club of countries. And of course, Australia would be extremely beneficial, because it's true that Australia can already participate. It's right. But through association, Australian entities would be treated as if they were from the EU, which means that they would be able to set up consortia by themselves and propose research by themselves. Whereas now, you can be invited by existing consortia and you are not entitled to propose research projects by yourself out of your own initiative. Should you be associated, then you would be able to do that. And that's a very big difference. And sorry to say, but New Zealand just associated to Horizon. Why not Australia?
Literally signed their free trade agreement and like within weeks.
Precisely.
Right. And so how do you then get the Australian government to rethink its position on some of this, do you think? And do you think that can happen reasonably quickly?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not a matter of rethinking. I think that I should be probably more clearer in what the benefits are for both the Australian side and the EU side on this. I think that
what are they?
What the Go8 and what the Europe and what the business community of Australia are advocating for is really good, because we have to show the government that it's not just the EU which would like to enlarge its associated country, but it's also the Australian stakeholders who have a clear interest.
And that's an important point. It's not just universities either.
Yeah.
You know, we're working with the Australian Industry Group, we're working with the academies, we're working with the European Australian Business Council, and this is not a Group of 8 initiative. This is every Australian university would benefit from it. Now, it's fair to say that given our very strong connection and our depth and breadth of research, of course, the Group of 8 universities, we already do access a significant amount of funding. So I think from government's perspective, if we can demonstrate to them that this is not about handing money to the EU and this is not about handing money to the Group of 8, it's actually about business, industry, universities, government, and dealing with those issues. You said, like, what are the benefits? But dealing with those issues that you've articulated around, you know, the big global challenges we all have, like climate change in the Indo-Pacific region.
Yep.
You know, you could work with your European partners. I mean, that happens, but you could scale. You'd actually have access to better funds. You know, there's so many opportunities.
Well, $100 billion, you said
Euro.
Euro.
100 billion euro, which is $160 billion.
That's huge.
Another great aspect, it would be the research, the medical research, including the one on cancer, because we have the biggest world's research fund on cancer. So, and here you have centers of excellency, incredible good centers of excellency here in Australia. So it will be just good to join forces.
So some of these big areas, like, as you say, climate change, cancer research, massive areas of research that have huge benefits for humanity long term.
Yes.
Yeah.
All research is global.
Yeah.
Right. There's you know, we spend a lot of time in these podcasts talking to eminent researchers. And I've not yet had a researcher in the pod booth when we've talked to them where it's just happened, you know, in the state of Queensland, or, you know, it is global. That is the nature of research. The expertise is everywhere.
Yeah.
And the challenges are pretty much the same.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just different scale, different context.
So are you confident in the long term that there can be this association long term?
Very much so. Yeah. But I'm even confident that in the short to medium term that will happen, because sometimes it's just the strength of facts which lead things to happen. And I think this is an incredible, evidence that once everybody sees clearer, then we could really see where the advantages rather than the disadvantages.
Now, the EU is Australia's third largest trading partner, second largest source of foreign investment.
It is.
And Australia's trade agreement was much anticipated, but negotiations hit a stumbling block in October last year. Where do we go from here with all of that?
It's a little bit as I told you on Horizon. I think that we have to look at facts, and the facts are what you said. Another fact is that an FTA would create wealth both for Australian entities and for European entities. And the whole issue is to find the real win-win balance for both of us. And I think that we are there. We just need to have a final push. There again, the Australian stakeholders have a vital role to play, because I think that it's up to the Australian stakeholders to explain to the decision makers what their interests are in the immediate, medium, and long term. And on the FTA, I hear as well many voices which are asking to the two parties to sit again at the table and find a solution ASAP. And certainly, we, as European Union, are ready to sit at the table whenever our Australian friends would consider this fit.
I think it's really important also to understand that there was a lot that was agreed on as part of the free trade agreement. And as often happens,
it's the little things that seem to get in the way. Well,
they're little things to some, but not to others, obviously.
Well,
but
it seems to me
so much work goes on.
Yeah, but when I was listening to it from a distance, and it'd be what you called a particular wine that would be a stumbling block.
I think we actually worked through that, or not we, but that was sort of the geographical indicators. Feta or Parmesan.
All those things seem to, they're all these details that get in the way of the bigger picture.
That's what the public pick up, don't they?
They do. They do.
Can I call feta?
Yes.
And I actually think, I'm being flippant, but that does go to the more broader issue around explaining the value of a free trade agreement, not just to the stakeholders who are engaged in it, whether it be the agricultural sector or the mining sector or the services, business services or whatever, financial, but to the everyday Australian
consumer. Yeah.
What does an FTA do for me? Because I think it's too far above, not above them, but it's just it's out there somewhere.
Yeah.
How is it going to change my life around cost of living? And I think we can articulate those things. Of course.
Yeah.
But we don't.
Yeah.
And I've had this discussion actually with the Trade Minister and his predecessor, and I know the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade actually put in an Austrade roadshows around Australia to actually and bring in Indigenous communities and really go out to the regions to say this is why this is important. So I think there's, we're communicators, but it always gets back to, in many ways, communication of what it is we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And it did seem that we were just so close, and then it fell over.
Yeah, well, you see, it's the solutions for the geographic indications were on the table. They had been identified because you see, what you see is the point of the iceberg, but before the last meeting, there had been 1 year of very intense consultations and negotiations. Just the week ahead of the last meeting, the chief negotiators had met, and many, let's say, possible landing zones had been identified. So we are really there. But if you allow me, again, the free trade agreement, like Horizon, have a meaning which goes beyond their labeling. An FTA means an alignment, also geopolitical alignment, between not just economic interest, but also with values.
Yeah.
And I give you one example. The EU is the only, let's say, ally to Australia, which has a general tariff of 5% on any of its goods. For example, you don't impose these tariffs on Chinese goods or on Americans or UK or Indians. And we, of course, in the EU impose tariffs as well on Australian goods, which are imported to the EU. So this doesn't make any sense at all when you see it from a geopolitical point of view. A practical example: fight against climate change. You want to go green, so there is a clear appetite from the European industry to come, to invest, to bring know-how, knowledge, educated people. But there's also an immediate need for importing for goods from the EU, which allow you to do that. For example, solar turbines. Wind turbines.
Turbines,
Wind
yeah.
turbines,
Yeah.
yes. Well, the EU through Denmark, it's one of the biggest, and Germany, biggest producers in the world. But you know that the EU wind turbines have the 5% tariff, whereas the Chinese turbines don't. Can you explain me a little bit this notion
No.
of de-risking?
Yes, I see your point.
Or not decoupling, because we don't want to decouple, but we want to de-risk. And I consider that some aspects of our economy are strategic, both for you and for us. So why don't we work on de-risking on those?
And to go to Vicky's point, there's a cost for both sides with this. And if you can explain to the consumers that, you know, these 5% tariffs all add to the cost of every good that you buy in the supermarket that comes from Europe and vice versa in Europe.
Absolutely.
So that you do away with that cost and suddenly we're all benefiting with a cheaper product.
Yeah. Look at the cars, for example. That's the same, the European cars. Or another example, the electric cars that you import, the ones that you import from the EU have not just the luxury tax car, which is for everybody, but the 5% on top of that of the general tariffs that you impose on EU products.
Yeah. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, and we've covered a lot of ground, but you've got a lot more work to do in the years ahead, having taken up your position only a little over a year ago. We'll watch with interest as we examine Horizon Europe and the free trade agreement in the long term. But thank you very much, Ambassador, for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot. Really looking forward. And we should not also forget the security and development aspect, which is paramountly important. I'm very happy that and that's linked also to research, because we are launching cooperation projects already with some specialized agencies here in Australia on cyber, on hybrid, and disinformation and countering disinformation, because we have to make our democracy stronger and not to allow malign views to use our strengths, which are freedoms, freedom of expression, freedom of research, as potential weaknesses.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your company today. If you'd like more information about the issues raised in this podcast or other related topics, please visit our website at go8.edu.au. And a quick reminder, you can always tune in to Debate at Go8 on Spotify, Google, Apple or YouTube. Bye for now.